All right. Welcome everyone to our session, Our Evolving American Story. We're so excited to have you with us. My name is Trisha Edwards. I'm the Deputy Director for the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service, better known as SITES, and Smithsonian affiliations. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about our work later in the presentation. And for now, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Emily Key.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Key. I'm the Director of Education for the National Museum of the American Latino, which is the newest, one of the two newest museums in the Smithsonian family. We were formerly part of the Smithsonian Latino Center, which has a 25-year history of working to bring Latino stories and content to the Smithsonian and its different units, museums, collections, and resources. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I will pass it along to my colleague, Carrie Kochko.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carrie Kochko, and I lead the Education and Experience team over here at the National Museum of American History. And inquiry is at the heart of our work. I'm excited to be with you today. I'm the child of a science teacher and an art teacher and spent my summers visiting the Smithsonian museums because they were free, and that's what we could afford on 2 teachers' salaries. And through those summers, I developed the idea that learning was a superpower and that I was in charge of exploring and learning in and out of school. And it was up to me to ask as many questions as needed to satisfy my curiosity. So yes, teachers, I was that kid. So I never stopped learning, and I'm excited to learn with you today. And on the next slide, we have an advanced organizer because we're educators and we need to have an advanced organizer for our production today. Okay, advanced organizer. So we're going to talk about what is Smithsonian education, what we're all about, why we're here with you today. Our national education landscape, kind of taking the temperature of the world we live in today. A little bit about our diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion work, not just race, gender, and ethnicity, but also things like language, geography, and disability. And then we're going to walk through a few of our STAR resources that we have for educators and provide access to those free resources for you. But before we dive into that, we want to ask you a question on the next slide. We're all here at this amazing summit because we believe in public education and the ability for all students to thrive. So what makes you optimistic about the future of education? If you can, please respond in the chat, and we'll take a look and have a conversation about that. All of our mics are open, so any of the 3 of us can respond. What makes you optimistic about the future of education?
Just to reflect a little on the summit, this morning we had the opportunity to listen to young people talk about their experiences in the classroom, in after-school programs or summer programs. And I think what makes me optimistic is actually seeing the enthusiasm from young people to learn and to want to be part of a learning community. I think that's very exciting, and optimism for what is to come in the future.
So we're starting to see some of your responses. So thank you, Barbara. Barbara says, I believe emerging technologies allow us to reach more people we wouldn't otherwise reach. I love that. I think our presentation today is example of that. And Lindsay has a similar response. She says, new possibilities in the world of digital education and ed tech.
Beth Brandon says passion and the voice of Gen Z, which I totally, second after this morning student panel. You really see that passion.
And I see Karen and Stephanie are echoing, saying students, the young people. Anne says young people's fearlessness about speaking up and changing the world. I do give a big cosign to that, Anne. Curiosity of students.
Kira Swanson just posted that we are gradually learning that the traditional education structure isn't adequate for many students. And I think the work of Dr. Pamela Cantor this morning really echoes that, as well as Rebecca keynote presentation yesterday, echoes that idea that, you know, we need to start embracing these new ideas of how people learn, the science of learning, but also how we can evolve and change with that.
Yeah, so many wonderful comments. Carrie, is there anything that stands out to you among these great responses? I like Jamie says it's important to meet students where they are, which I think I really believe. I think we think about that a lot at the Smithsonian in our work.
Kim Reiser, Carrie, this one's for you. Kim Reiser says, greater focus on engaged learning that promotes democracy. I think that really is at the heart of a lot of the work that the National Museum of American History is doing. And I think, Kim, you'll find a kindred spirit in Carrie.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk some more about that in just a little bit.
I think so many great responses, but I think maybe we'll end on Mary Grace Stewart, who says groups like the Smithsonian, and we love to hear that. And we think about our work really in partnership with you all and other teachers. And so we're glad that you're looking to us and you think that we are part of what's optimistic about the future of education. So if we can go to the next slide, please. All right. So if you've been attending the summit, you probably already know a little bit about the Smithsonian, but I just want to sort of ground our conversation and the landscape that we work in at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian is the world's largest museum, education, and research complex. We have 21 museums, 2 of which are currently being built. Emily referenced her institution, the National Museum of the American Latino, which is one of our new museums, and the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. We also have research centers, education centers, cultural centers, the National Zoo, and 21 libraries. So we're a really big institution, as you probably know. Our education team is about 300 strong. We have educators working across the Smithsonian and all of those units, as we say at the Smithsonian that I mentioned, and annually we reach about 10 million people through our educational programming, resources, and professional learning opportunities. The Smithsonian, we're about 175 years old, and we have always worked to tell a complete and inclusive story. Our work today is an extension of where we've been and where we'll be headed. Our mission has remained the same since our founding. It's the increase and diffusion of knowledge. So we think about the increase as the research side and the diffusion as the education and the public outreach work we do. The Smithsonian is really, I think, one of the world's most dynamic resources to support and enhance lifelong learning, particularly that happens in our pre-K through 12 classrooms. One of the things that I love about the Smithsonian, and I think that makes us really unique among other educational institutions, is the fact that throughout all of our museums and research centers and the zoo and our libraries, we encompass every part of the human experience, from art to history to culture and science and everything in between. And we make connections between those disciplines, between artistic expression and scientific discovery. We think about the relationship between the past and the present and the future. And we think a lot about the dynamic between individuals and communities. Mostly at heart, we are a learning institution. And particularly among our education colleagues, we're always thinking about improving our processes. How do we think about making our work better and continuing to better serve the needs of our various constituents. Lastly, I'll just share that we are a quasi-federal institution, as you may know, which means that we receive some funding from the government. We also receive private funding through philanthropy and other means. And we are a nonpartisan organization. So we really think about how we situate our work in our scholarship, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation. So before we really dive into the meat of what we're going to talk about today and share examples from our work and the work that we're doing with educators across the country, we thought we'd share a video from our secretary, Lonnie Bunch. If you had an opportunity to participate in the opening reception the other evening, you will have seen him on a panel and you may be familiar with him. But we feel like this video kind of does a great job of showing the institutions, the breadth of the work that I just described, but also kind of the vision for where we're going, and the ride that we hope that you will take with us as we move forward. So if we can play the first video, that would be great.
Since humans have first walked on this planet, they have looked up into the night sky at all those sparkling points of light and wondered, what if we're only seeing a small piece of the puzzle? As human beings, we are all seekers of knowledge, collectors of artifacts, curators of experiences.
The Smithsonian has, for 175 years, been the glue that helped hold the country together. Through history, art, culture, science, it has been a place to help people better understand themselves.
The Smithsonian channels that power to fuel the voices, ideas, and dreams of tomorrow. That tomorrow starts today. We're reimagining our mission to meet the world's most pressing needs. We'll learn and revisit.
We are trying to empower students of all ages to ask questions, to spark their curiosity.
Research and reveal.
At the Smithsonian, our job really is to go to the frontiers of knowledge and then to push on them.
Record and reflect.
It's about looking for the stories and looking for the objects that will create an inclusive history for our public.
Find meaning in our past.
We want to be an institution that helps a country understand itself, that helps a country be made better. We should be able to use history to find the greater good.
To give rise to a brighter future for the next generation and the ones after that.
One of the great things that our museum can do is to contextualize the contemporary moment.
Seeking out the stories we've missed and the perspectives we lack and the discoveries we've yet to make.
We all have a responsibility to engage in building the future we want to see.
Understanding where we've been so that we can shape what's to come together.
Let us build on what we've done in the past, but let us recognize we can do even more.
All in the pursuit of our shared future. Join us in reimagining what that future can be.
Hello. Okay. So we're back. And as you can see, the Smithsonian has always been about learning since its inception. And our work is grounded, and education is grounded in the institution's history, its mission and values, plus our scholarship. And as a trusted source of information and educational resources, the Smithsonian is committed to supporting educators across the nation and to fulfilling our mission and our responsibility for the increase and the diffusion of knowledge. And we support robust, dynamic, and diverse educational experiences for all learners. Our varied collections and our wealth of experience at the Smithsonian makes us well positioned to support educators across the nation with information, professional learning, and engaged learning experiences, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. And they address a complexity of issues like inclusion, diversity, equity, race, gender, scientific inquiry, and identity in an accurate and evidence-based manner. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Emily, who's going to talk a little bit more about why the Smithsonian is working in this space at this time.
Thank you, Carrie. Well, as most of you already know from the last few days of the summit, you have already chosen to be part of the Smithsonian learning community. We are embarking on this endeavor as a continuation of the 175 years of work that have already been done at the Smithsonian. And so when you ask yourself why the Smithsonian, it really comes down to a really important key phrase, and that is that we already are a trusted source. Museums are a trusted source for objective information, and the Smithsonian has been exploring and grappling what it means to live in a diverse and democratic society that focuses on telling the complete story since its inception. The increase in diffusion of knowledge is really about continuing to learn from each other and from the world around us. And that is something that is grounded in the scholarship that we do. So all of the content that we produce, whether it is educational materials and lesson plans, activities or exhibitions, they are all grounded in the scholarship that has really driven the Smithsonian's mission for 175 years. Another reason why the Smithsonian is because we are naturally a national champion of the study of history, culture, art, and science. As a colleague of mine just said earlier, we really are pushing this idea of progress towards a more just and perfect union every day by understanding each other and our world in an even greater way. And we do that by continual studying whether it's through our research and our scholarship, or whether it's studying through providing continuing learning opportunities for learners of all ages. Right now, we're talking specifically about K-12, but we also talk about lifelong learners. We champion, and museums in general champion, this idea that learning does not end when you are done with formal education. It continues and goes on throughout our lifetime. And finally, we are an institution that is skilled at engaging with K-12 educators to provide additional learning opportunities and resources. In other words, we host summits like this one, professional development opportunities, and teacher institutes across the institution, from the Smithsonian's American Art Museum and learning how you can use art and visual art study in a historical context or an English language arts classroom, to the Air and Space Museum's Teacher Institute, teaching about how you can use technology, 21st century skills to teach about STEM and STEM thinking and design thinking. We are a natural source to provide these K-12 opportunities that allow our educators to go back into the classroom every academic year and bring new opportunities to those students that need it the most. I will turn it back to the next slide and my colleague Carrie to talk about this incredible new initiative that the Smithsonian is undertaking for this next stage of our history.
I think we're on to Tricia here.
Yeah, I think
And
I
yes,
was going to
I meant
say, I
it's
didn't want to step
Apologies.
on toes. Yes. So thanks, Emily and Carrie. So as you heard in the video from our secretary, he talked about, in the video talked about this idea of our shared future and where we as a nation are going together, or we as a world are going together, and how we create the best and brightest future for ourselves. And this is just the next evolution of our work. As we have said, our mission has remained the same, but how we execute that mission, of course, has changed over time. So currently, we are focusing on the 4 big areas that you see on the screen: life on a sustainable planet, reckoning with our racial past, reaching rural communities, and women's history. And we're centering our work around these ideas, and it may look like, oh, life on a sustainable planet, that's science, or women's history. Well, that's clearly history, but the way the Smithsonian approaches these things, I think is unique, and also I think helps drive us forward to new insights and solutions and ways of thinking about these challenges. So as our science colleagues are researching climate change and the impact of climate change and looking at strategies to address it, we're also addressing these in our history and culture units to see the impact, what has come before and where are we going, and what are the impacts on different cultures around our country and around the world. So we're thinking interdisciplinarily about this and thinking about how are we educating about these issues, and then also helping to solve them. So how do we help people understand climate change or the issues and the history of racial injustice in our country, but also how are we solving them? How can the Smithsonian help it, and how can we empower you and your students and others to think about their own role in solving these and moving us forward to that brighter shared future? And with that, I will pass it along for the next slide. And I believe this is going over to Emily.
Thank you, Trisha. So as part of our shared future, a few years back now, it's September of 2021, we really came to a point in time where we needed to do some reflection. And the reason why this reflection started was because of a project that the National Museum of the American Latino and the Asian Pacific American Center embarked on, which was to create a new type of professional learning opportunity, a professional educator engagement, really centered around the idea of creating community and building conversation through dialogue to really empower teachers and other educators, whether in the formal or informal setting, to have the opportunity to promote civil discourse and dialogue, but also to connect cross-cultural realities. And so we took a look at a particular moment in time, a history of the farm workers movement in the US, and we decided to explore that as a professional learning opportunity to talk about Asian Latino community collaborations and connections over history, but also in the contemporary time, really reflecting on primary source materials and using some techniques that museum educators use, such as looking at the primary sources and really focusing on what does the object tell us about that particular moment in time, about the people, about the place, and then connecting that to a local story. So this is a national narrative of, the farm workers movement really based in California, but connecting it to local communities and to connections of farm workers, of other laborers in different communities across the country. And so making history both a national story and a local narrative. And we picked this because it was something that both of our museums or museum and center were looking at in depth. One of the things that we realized through this process was that we needed to work hand in hand with the social studies department, in particular school districts. So we spent all of 2020 and half of 2021 working alongside the social studies chair and educators to create a learning opportunity for the summer of 2021 that would allow educators to dive deep into not only primary source materials of Filipino and Latino history, of national stories such as the farm workers movement, but also local narratives using their local museums and local bilingual newspapers. And what we encountered was that educators were excited and thrilled to have the opportunity to dive deep into primary source materials, to really get access to learn some of these techniques of how to use primary source materials in their classroom in a way that would be exciting, and also how to center first voice in this process, how to respect the fact that students come with their own lived experience, their family experiences, and empowering those family stories that can add to the text that's being taught in the classroom and in the textbooks. But during the summer of 2021, we encountered some difficulties, right? There were some real situations that were happening across the education landscape that really started to shake the core of what teachers felt comfortable teaching in the classroom. What were they allowed to teach? How could they teach some of this complete and inclusive history in the classroom? And we had to take a step back and really reflect and ask the question of our teachers, what are the challenges in teaching some of these histories in the classroom? A wonderful colleague once said, lifelong learning is not only the underpinning of what museums do, it's what every museum educator needs to practice every day in order to refine the programs and resources that we develop and make sure that we're addressing the audience's needs. So we went back and we talked with our educators and teachers that we were encountering in our different and various opportunities, whether it was through the civil intersections, whether it was through another teacher institute or educator resource engagement that another unit was participating in order to understand what was happening, what was being heard. And by and large, we heard that a lot of these sort of legislations that were propping up all across the nation, starting in that, spring and summer of 2021, were having a chilling effect, right? Educators wanted to teach this content, but there was a larger political process at play, right? We had a quote that really resonated with us from one of our educators. I've always taught about history and culture, but it was hard for me to recognize the cultures that were in my classroom. To pull these out and highlight them in a respectful way, I realize now that most people want to be heard, to tell their stories and see themselves in the stories that are being told. And so we realized that we needed to have a solution, a plan for how we were going to continue the long-lasting work that the Smithsonian has done to bring complete history to the forefront. As we've mentioned several times, this isn't new in the Smithsonian's practice and ethos, but what is new is really articulating and putting out there and centering the educator in our approach, that commitment to teaching a complete inclusive history, but also to support our educators from the many places that we've been hearing, needed to hear support, needed to find resources and access to primary source materials that they could point to and say, this is grounded in scholarship, this is grounded in research and in fact-based understandings. And so that really spurred us on to develop a working group that allowed us to really explore how we could provide this opportunity and this continued engagement for educators. So on the next slide, you'll see that this working group has a guiding set of principles and core values. And many of these are things that we've repeated already in the process of this presentation, because they're not only core values of our educators, they're also core values of the Smithsonian overall. Maintaining a reputation as a trusted source by ensuring that everything that we put out into the community of learners that we're trying to engage with is well researched, it has scholarship and grounded in scholarship at the forefront. Making sure that we're serving teachers and students' needs first and foremost. Listening, right? We started off this part of the presentation by saying we took a step back and listened to the educators and teachers that what are their needs? What are the things that they need us to provide? And now our working group centers this idea of always being audience first, right? Ensuring that we're getting the right data, asking the right questions to make sure that then we create the right type of solutions, right? Understanding the importance of trust in our relationship. Earlier today in the summit, we were talking, the panel was talking about the importance and the sense of belonging, and that really underpinning that with the sense of creating trust. Understanding for our working group that trust in us was in part built off of building a sort of dialogue and a relationship that was based between not only the institution and our educators, but within our institution as well, our own educators, creating a system that supports and trusts each other to sort of be able to ensure that we're providing the best opportunities possible. And then we needed to make sure that we needed to explore topics that were related to historical inequities, and understanding that that's going to be difficult. Being very clear to ourselves, to our audiences, to our stakeholders, that talking about a complete American story is sometimes talking about difficult topics that are challenging to address, but that one of the best ways to do this work is to establish a long-term commitment, to not give up when things get hard, but to continue committed to the work, to the process of listening, to the process of iteration through that listening, right? We produce content, but then we learn from it, we evaluate it, we make sure that we are meeting audience's needs, and knowing that this is a long-term process, not a short-term solution. And hopefully what that will allow us to do is really focus on our goals. And so the next slide really focuses on what we want those guiding principles and core values to eventually result in. And it's that idea of ensuring supporting tools and classroom resources are meaningful, that they engage in work and context that we are providing, and that we're always prioritizing and fostering the idea of learning how to think. That idea of critical thinking and inquiry underpins what we do. And that is how we can work to not only tell a more complete story, but also to ensure a more inclusive future. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, who can talk to you a little bit about what is the landscape that we're trying to do all this work in.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so here's our landscape, as you're all well aware from your daily teaching. This is where we are. You don't need to read all the statistics to you, but this is the up-to-date information. So right now, in addition to the current pushes towards exclusionary practices around the country, what challenges are you dealing with in your practice? There are long-lasting impacts of the pandemic. There's issues that predate the pandemic, lack of time for professional development, et cetera. I would love it if you would put into the chat some of the challenges you're facing, whether they're new or old challenges. As part of our listening, that's really important for us.
We are monitoring the chat as well to make sure that we capture any particular points that folks want to make.
While we're watching for the chat, I can say, we do hear you, and we're also always listening to and working with educators, as Emily said, in workshops, conferences where we go to the conferences that you go to. We impanel focus groups, advisory panels, and we work with teachers all the time as co-creators in our content.
Got a response from Kristen in the chat who says that the inability to discuss LGBTQIA and queer issues is a challenge. And Veronica, the condensing of the time for social sciences that you mentioned is something that we think about and talk about a lot at the Smithsonian, and thinking, are there ways that we can better support and provide materials that teachers can use in the condensed amount of time that they have?
Yeah, that's a huge and long-standing issue.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Colson says there's no time to collaboratively plan, and to, I think that underscores this idea that even we're learning here at the Smithsonian of creating communities of practice and being able to brainstorm and bounce ideas off of each other.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
Maya, I see you say, I'm a teacher in Florida. Misinformation from our stakeholders adds a hurdle when teaching state standards. And yes, I mean, I think the slide that Carrie just shared really, I think that example is a great example of those stats that Carrie shared, and the challenges that this legislation is creating.
Sure. And I see from Cynthia, just respect for their profession, right? For educators and the care that we all put into the research, we all put into the work. That's all got to add up. You can continue to put your ideas in the chat. I will move us on to the next slide and just say, as I said, we attend conferences like NCS SAS and other teacher conferences. We were blessed enough to have the Teachers of the Year from all over the country here at the Smithsonian. We did listening sessions with them, and we've done a number of collaborative projects throughout the year. And so in response to all of the things you're saying and what we've heard from these other outlets, we want to make sure that all of our resources are aligned, they address specific areas of need, they're free, and they're easily accessible. So when you look at this slide in our little kapow clouds there, our offerings can be roughly categorized as universal, so free, downloadable, or streaming materials online, and then public programming and experiences that you can have at one of our museums or science centers. Traveling exhibitions through our Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service and through our Smithsonian affiliate museums across the nation. National convenings like this Education Summit, our Earth Optimism Initiative, or our National Youth Summit that brings together middle school and high school students with experts, activists, teachers, and scholars in a national conversation about events in America's past that have specific relevance to our nation's present and the future. And then lastly, but not least, professional learning. So content and methods, workshops, institutes, and just-in-time learning through media in all of our different subject areas. So art, science, history, invention, innovation, and often we are incorporating a multidisciplinary approach to our professional learning as well. And when we hit the next slide, I can just provide this little list, a little mini list of some universal resources and national convenings that you can access. At the end of our presentation, there'll be a QR code that will take you to a site with a variety of resources. I'm going to hand off to Tricia, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about our Smithsonian Affiliations Program.
Thanks, Carrie. So the Smithsonian Affiliations is part of the work that are the relationships that my office manages. These are a group of about 200 organizations, mostly museums, but also other cultural and educational organizations across the country. We're in 46 states, Puerto Rico and Panama, and we work with these organizations to create long-term relationships. As Emily talked about, being in this work for the long haul. That's how we think about our work at Smithsonian Affiliations. We want to create relationships that last and are ongoing, so we can collaborate and learn together and reach people across the nation. We reach about 30 million visitors each year through our affiliates, so we are really extending the Smithsonian's reach through our collaborations with them. And we work with our affiliates to bring Smithsonian resources, content, and expertise that both align with the Smithsonian's priorities, but also meet the needs of our affiliates and the needs of their community. I often think of the Smithsonian as sort of the frame of a picture and providing the structure and the framework and the national narrative. And then the work of our affiliates and other collaborators around the country really help paint that picture and fill it in. If you almost think of a paint by number, each affiliate community is filling in one of those little cells to help paint the picture of what our national story is. So through our work, we don't work directly with teachers, but through our affiliates, we reach teachers in your communities. And in the past several years, affiliates like us, they've been struggling with how to talk about big issues like climate change, racial justice, gender identity, issues in those 4 pillars in the Our Shared Future initiative that we've shared, while also wanting to better serve their communities and reach more diverse audiences in meaningful ways. And we frequently hear things like, as we've been able to deliver content and programs and resources around these big issues that are grounded in the scholarship and expertise of the Smithsonian, we've been hearing things from affiliates like, well, we've been wanting to do this work and we've been wanting to work with our community in this way, and we haven't felt like we could do it on our own. But with the Smithsonian as a partner, we feel ready. And so it's often not that our affiliates don't have the knowledge or the scholarship themselves, but they need a partner like the Smithsonian to, as Emily said, because the Smithsonian is a trusted source, to actually take the leap and do this work. We are also conveners, and we bring affiliates together to learn from us and one another, share challenges and successes, and problem solve together. Last year, we ran a year-long project with 10 of our affiliates called Fostering Critical Conversations with Our Communities. And each affiliate came to the project with a challenge or an idea of a program that they wanted to reach a specific community with. So not just our community as a monolith, but the LGBTQ community or a community of marginalized population. So they really identified a specific community, the Asian American community. And we talked a lot, and we gave them some training, but most importantly, we were this cohort of organizations that could talk about how they're working with their community and implementing community engagement programs. What are the challenges that they're having, but also what are the successes, and how can we learn from one another? And much like, your comments in the chat reflect the challenges you're facing as teachers, our affiliates are often feeling those same challenges of working in their community. So it became this very much a safe space for us to think about how we foster those critical conversations in ways that are grounded in scholarship, but also really meaningfully and authentically meet the needs of our communities. And the quote there, I think, is just really wonderful, showing how the most important part of the program for many was this idea of coming together and having like-minded people and having a space to vent sometimes, but also work through these challenges. So we think about our role not only in providing these resources and expertise, but also being that convener and thinking about how do we bring people together to work through these really knotty issues. So Carrie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tricia. So I work at the American History Museum, and our mission is empowering people to create a just and compassionate future by exploring, preserving, and sharing the complexity of our past. That's what gets me out of bed every morning. We seek intersections and crossroads and cross-cultural encounters, revolutions, resistances, turning points, and points in our history that failed to turn. And we ask people, how have we come together to make change? We, follow the idea that inquiry is the enemy of indoctrination. So we help prepare learners to ask really big questions and use history to understand the origins of our systems and traditions and the issues that we live with today. I'm going to show you a short video or portion of a video that introduces you to Becoming Us, a resource for teaching an accurate and inclusive immigration and migration story for the United States. And then I'll deconstruct it a little bit and tell you how we made it. Go ahead and roll the video, please.
Teaching a full history of the United States requires an accurate and inclusive narrative about immigration and migration. That is why the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History is excited to share Becoming Us, a new educational resource designed to bring robust, critical, and culturally relevant instruction about immigration and migration to students in grades 8 through 12.
In this tutorial, we'll talk about how you can prepare to use this new curriculum. Becoming Us brings immigration and migration to life through online case studies or lessons organized into 5 units. The materials are aligned to national content standards and formatted so you can conveniently print, share, or download them for later use. Each unit represents a founding principle or core tension that defines the American experiment. They are borderlands, education, policy, belonging, and resistance.
The units and case studies ask you and your students to confront sometimes painful truths about American history. As an educator, this means facilitating critical conversations, creating inclusive classroom environments where students feel seen, heard, and comfortable being their authentic selves, and supporting students in their diverse reactions to learning about topics like race and racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and slavery.
No matter where you're starting from or how deeply you know the subject matter, culturally responsive teaching is inside-out work. Translating the Becoming Us resources into meaningful and effective instruction means teachers should approach this inner work with a commitment to being mindful, prepared, and brave.
Being mindful means making an honest assessment of your readiness to teach with Becoming Us. Is this new material for you? Do you have practice engaging these topics? How does your lived experience influence your feelings about the case studies? And what about your students? Are the case studies windows for your students that give them glimpses into lives that are different from their own? Or are they mirrors that reflect realities they may already have experienced or understand?
Being mindful of how the subject matter may affect you and your students will help you anticipate and then mediate difficult moments, like outbursts, disengagement, or denial, that threaten to derail or diminish the effectiveness of your teaching. Don't skip this step. Being honest about how these resources fit into your teaching experience in your classroom culture is fundamental to teaching it successfully.
Once you mindfully assess your readiness level, you will be better equipped to prepare. Materials like Let's Talk from Teaching Tolerance can help you make decisions about what to do if you find yourself experiencing strong emotions while teaching, or help you think through what to do if students are reacting to one of the case studies.
Preparing also means focusing on brush-up efforts if some of the history is unfamiliar to you. Much of the material covered in Becoming Us is lesser-known history. There is no shame in background learning. To help you with this step, Becoming Us provides unit-specific pre-teaching resources. Look for the Preparing to Teach document under the Resources tab on the website for links to Let's Talk and other helpful guides. You'll also see notes to educators on certain case study landing pages that can help you prepare your students.
The last step of this inner work is to cultivate your own bravery and to foster brave spaces in your classroom. You can prepare students to be brave by talking about how to stay engaged with material that feels challenging, how to listen to their fellow students without judgment, and how to recognize that being uncomfortable is often a precursor to meaningful learning.
Establishing the trust necessary to support critical conversations takes time, patience, and intentionality. One approach is to create clear norms or community agreements and reference them throughout the year, not just when teaching Becoming Us material. Another is to explicitly teach speaking and listening so students come to the resources with the skills to speak up, sit back, and process complex information or facts that may challenge their previously held beliefs. How did we become us? You and your students will never stop exploring this question because we are always changing. We hope you find these resources inspiring, both as an educator and as an individual with your own Becoming Us story.
Thank you. So as you can see, this curriculum covers many of the areas that are in the news today as far as what's controversial. But it is based on need. The curriculum was developed over a 6-year period that predates the current conversations, and the development continues today. It's based on a 2015 research study called Reframing and the Teaching and Learning of Migration and Immigration in the United States. It was conducted in collaboration with the University of Maryland and affiliate museums across the country. We reviewed state standards relating to immigration and migration in all 50 states. And if you can take a look at the next slide, you'll see that topics like slavery are not well thought of as far as a story of migration. It's not usually taught as part of the migration and immigration story. West Coast immigration and folks coming from Asian countries, not part of the curriculum. The story of the Great Migration, not well covered. And certain perspectives of folks, especially those for whom the borders crossed over them or were already here, those stories not well represented. And a literature review revealed that children with a positive ethnic and racial identity tend to also have positive attitudes towards those from different ethnic racial groups, and that holding negative views of other races and ethnicities is related to lower achievement outcomes. Once we saw that need was there, and we discovered that through research, we identified our collections here at the museums at the Smithsonian and what expertise we needed to help fill that gap. And that's what led us to develop Becoming Us. On the next slide, so after we said that there was a need, we followed up and said, okay, well, this needs to be aligned, it needs to be free, and it needs to be accessible. That's what we heard from teachers. So we ensured alignment with the NCSS 10 themes for historical study. And when we spoke with teachers, they really stressed that they wanted primary sources first and foremost. So you'll see those infused in each of the case studies. And we bring to light hidden histories with connections to contemporary issues. For example, in our belonging theme, we explore how the dominant and non-dominant cultures have reacted to belonging in times of crises like World War II, and changes to who gets to belong at any given time. As far as accessibility, we've created many teacher supports because curriculum is not going to be used if the teachers aren't supported. So there's glossaries, key dates, historical milestones, teachers' tips and videos, and an essential understanding guide. The glossary gives you really nuanced language about like incarceration versus internment when we're talking about the Japanese American incarceration during World War II. The materials are no cost, so they're accessible in that way, and they're on our website and freely downloadable. If you haven't yet, please also check out Native Knowledge 360, the National Museum of American Indians' premier curriculum for teaching and learning about the diverse, complex, and ongoing stories of Native peoples of the Americas. The site was an inspiration to us at American History in the development of Becoming Us. The last type of accessibility I wanted to mention is language, and Becoming Us is a fully bilingual website. The entire site is in English, and the entire site is also in Spanish. Our educators work with other educators in Puerto Rico and other learning environments where Spanish language content expands our impact and allows us to reach more students. And Emily's going to talk a little bit more Smithsonian bilingual content.
Hi, everyone. So I know we are running short on time. So on the next slide, I'll just say that the National Museum of the American Latino and its former Smithsonian Latino Center for about 25 years or so has been developing bilingual educational resources. So if you visit our Learning Lab page, the Smithsonian Learning Lab, the National Museum of American Latinos page, all of our resources are available in English and in Spanish. And we have everything from science activities that feature and center Latino scientists and their contributions to aviation, aeronautics, biology, nanotechnology sciences, to history and culture with our Nuestra America book series, which is a middle grade anthology on 30 Latinos and Latinas in U.S. history that have shaped the nation. And that comes with an additional resource kit and activities on visual art study, as well as English language arts and creative writing through biography storytelling. So we invite you to visit our Learning Lab page with additional resources, because as Carrie was saying, accessibility for us is also language accessibility, as well as accessibility of location. So many of our resources are both online, as well as things that can be printed out hard copy, because we know that some of our students are not found in resources that have access to technology in the classroom directly. So we have both low-tech and high-tech options to explore, and really underscores that importance of access for all communities. And I'll turn it over to Trisha to wrap us up and take us home.
Thanks, Emily and Carrie. As always, I'm just inspired by the work that you are doing and the impact that you're making on communities and teachers everywhere. So thanks for sharing your work. I want to briefly talk about a project from the Traveling Exhibition Service called The Bias Inside Us, which is a traveling exhibition as well as a community engagement initiative. There's also a robust online experience where you can see all sorts of great content from the exhibition, but also you can request an educator toolkit to use in your classroom. And this exhibition is really about the science of bias and comes from the place that all of us all of us have bias. Bias is human, and sort of acknowledging that, but also helping our visitors and our participants understand and counter their own implicit biases. We are working to help build capacity in the communities where we take our exhibition to convene dialogue that will increase empathy, and we want so that we can inspire more inclusive schools, communities, and workplaces. And I think the quote there, I think, really sums up the impact of the exhibition. We've seen through our evaluation that it is changing hearts and minds, which is wonderful, and that it really helps people reflect and think about not just the bias of someone else, but the bias in all of us, and how we can counter those, and how that helps us create kinder and more robust communities. And so with that, I think we'll go to our last slide. So we have shared a lot of the resources that the Smithsonian has, and we're curious about what resources do you find supportive for teaching this kind of complex and inclusive content? We're particularly interested in the 5 categories that you see on your slide: professional development, curricular materials, convenings, videos, and primary sources, because these are the things that the Smithsonian does well. And so we're curious, are there any of those which are best, or which would you like? And if is something that's not on that list, we'd love to hear that too. And so we're gonna take a look at the chat here while you put in your responses.
And we want to thank you all for staying with us a little over time and for adding your voice to our chat today. It's very important to us, and we'll continue to look at your questions and your responses after we finish today.
Seeing Heather says primary sources, Jacqueline says all of them. Leanne says primary sources. And Claire, what a nice comment. Awesome presentation with rich resources. Thank you. All right. I think we've seen some questions in the chat, and hopefully we've posted some answers there. I think we've been able to address most of them. But as Carrie said, we've really enjoyed our time with you this afternoon, and really appreciate you being with us and hanging in there a little bit longer, so we had an opportunity to share the work that we're doing.
If you have any additional questions, please feel free to submit them to the National Education Summit. I can also be reached if you have direct questions about Latino studies or bilingual resources for all age ranges. I can be reached at keye@si.edu. That is my email address. Again, that's keye@si.edu. And you can also check out our website at latino.si.edu. And I don't know if my colleagues want to share as well.
Absolutely. Happy to answer any questions about the work that we do around the country. edwardst@si.edu.
Great. And we are history teachers at si.edu. I think that's getting popped in the chat as well. Yeah, please access these resources through the QR code and ask us any questions you want through email.
Thank you all so much for being with us, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Bye-bye.
Bye.